Good day, everyone. Today we're joined by someone who doesn't come out of the political class. Warren Hamm is a Rossland-based contractor, helicopter maintenance engineer, and entrepreneur with more than 3 decades in British Columbia's resource and aviation sector. He's not a career politician. He hasn't held elected office, but he calls himself a builder, not a bureaucrat. And that's exactly how he's framing his run for the leader of the BC Conservative Party. Warren, welcome. How you doing?
I'm well, Dan. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate what you're doing.
Warren, you say you're a builder, not a bureaucrat. What does that mean to everyone that is just meeting you for the first time?
I guess I've been involved in small business, had a lot of employees over the years. I've been in new home construction, had a civil construction company. And yeah, I mean, I grew up in building homes with my dad. And then I went off to aircraft maintenance school. So we were, literally building helicopters, repairing helicopters. Yeah, and I've just really been kind of a serial entrepreneur, like cereal with a C, not an S. And yeah, that's what we've been doing for the last 30 years. Made Rossland my home, and I've started more than 12 businesses here in British Columbia.
You've done 12 businesses, and let me be clear, like that, you're obviously walking away from those businesses to jump into the political arena after Rustad has dropped out. Why now?
Well, I think every business in this province is struggling, uh, to never mind to get ahead or to stay afloat. And I've spoken with people in a wide variety from companies that own car dealerships to hoteliers to people that are in retail restaurants. I was in another restaurant yesterday shaking their head. There's just no one's coming in the door. So I guess what I say is the lines have crossed where it's really hard to just keep businesses afloat. So the reason to step up was to see that how we're going to change and look at the process uh, at the provincial level, everything from licensing and the bureaucracy that we have to wade through, whether we're building a new home, opening a new business, and try and um, make some real decisions to cut this red tape and let people get back on track, put more money back in people's pockets so they can get out there in the economy and spend money in these small, medium-sized businesses in British Columbia.
Oh, absolutely, I agree. I mean, I was looking at permitting for mine. There was a article in the Vancouver Sun, and they say like, permitting is almost impossible. With all this rhetoric with David Eby saying, let's build, it's taking this province up to 10 to 15 years to issue a permit. I mean, when you look at somewhere like Sweden, which is I would say is a very liberal country, yeah, 2 to 3 years to issue a permit. Think about that.
Right.
Sweden, 2 to 3. Here in BC, 10 to 15. You come from I believe you can't come from a home builder background, and you've explored a lot of the regulatory burdens that come with home building. How do you think that experience would come into play in this political arena that you want to jump into?
Well, I understand where all the roadblocks are along the way because I've been in these various fields and tried to get from, the concept to the finished product. There's just so many roadblocks in the way, and that's not complaining about. Um, it takes some diligence and some work to get through it, but there's so many layers in between that provide no value to the final product and run the costs up so much. Uh, it's just super disheartening when you see government use terms like, you know, um, government's going to build affordable housing. It's a fallacy. If the government's involved directly in any way, it runs the costs up 4 or 5 times and slows the process down. I mean, in the private sector, government, is the one that's laying out these legislation and rules that again slow us down. So government's incapable of doing it themselves, and the private sector has been bogged down by the legislation, bylaws, rules, building to, in the interior BC now we have to build to a seismic standard. They changed that even in the interior. And while that may apply on the coast, it shouldn't apply to the interior and just adds another layer, another cost. People are frustrated, and we've got to speed the process up and allow the private sector to build in real time, and the costs will come down. And of course, that'll be passed on to the consumer and have something that is more affordable than it is today.
I mean, sure, and there, that's one part of it, obviously the regulation, but a lot of people would say argue the supply and demand issue has been a problem. Um, some would argue, and I think that, if you look at what the Bank of Canada has been saying for, I would say probably since COVID, is that housing is a supply and demand issue. There's not enough supply, too much demand. When you look at the immigration numbers that Ottawa has been pushing on to places like British Columbia, it's hard not to see the comparison of home prices. Um, Especially when they pulled the taps. House prices here in Vancouver dropped about 10%. My question to you is, if you were premier and you were in leadership, would you be joining like the Alberta approach to standing up for Ottawa and asking for more autonomy on immigration, especially in our province?
Yeah, to answer your immigration question, it's funny. I've been out in the Indo-Canadian community, especially in this last week, and been invited in by various groups. It's been amazing. And when I talk to them, and we think of immigration, we do think of the Indo-Canadians, people coming from India immigrating here. It comes up in their own community, and uh, what they're saying is, some are saying, Warren, you need to stop immigration. But I think the key thing that came out of it was not like we need immigration, and it should be based on quality of person coming in, not quantity. Okay, and that's really what they say is get these qualified people to come in, not just open the doors. It's letting in people with criminal records. It's been mismanaged in Ottawa. The other thing that I found interesting was, I spoke with one of my local grocery stores where I live in the Kootenays. They own a couple of family-owned grocery stores, along third generation Italian families that run these grocery stores. And I spoke with one of the owners that was frankly working in the deli, uh, and she said to me, "Warren, you have to keep immigration going because if you don't, we're not going to be able to run the bakery and we're not going to be able to run the deli." So here I am in the South Asian or Indo community, and they're saying you need to slow it down, go to quality. And then here I am over in my local community with a third generation Italian grocery store, and they're saying you got to keep the doors open. So it's something that's got to be figured out. It's got to be figured out with Ottawa, and I'm not sure how we can differentiate provincially. I think there are some tools that could be made available to us, but really we want to get the feds on side to see this from a different perspective.
What do you think that perspective is? Because, you're saying that you're talking to one group and they're saying, "Let's put the taps on." And then you're talking to the business community over where you're from, and they're saying, "We need immigration." My question to you is when you look at youth employment right now, I think in BC, we're looking at between 12 to 14% youth unemployment, and that's from 16 to 24. Why can't that group fill in those spots that like your community is asking for? Youth unemployment or youth employment would their entry level, and it gives them a bridge to enter the workforce. Like, what's the opposition of that? Like from talking to the business community and talking to those leaders that are pushing for immigration.
Well, I think one of the challenges with youth is if they don't see hope ahead and they're living at home with their parents and playing video games in the basement and frankly selling pictures of their feet online. I mean, it sounds silly, but there's this there's not a motivation from youth to get out there and get a quotes normal job and works. And I think a chunk of it comes from the parents losing a bit of hope, whether they're still renting and they're in their mid 40s or early 50s. Um, again, you come back to housing prices and the cost to run a family or keep yourself afloat. I think once hope disappears and they don't see the ability. When I was 21 years old, I was finding a way to buy a house and working extra hard, maybe borrow a little bit of money off parents, pay it back in a year to make it work. Um, I think it's hard for some youth to see the future in a positive way, and immigration is one of those things where we're letting people in who are they want to work, want to build their families, are willing to work the long hours, and there's a disconnect. Um, it's complicated,
No, and
and
I
we
don't
got to figure
disagree
out how
with
to
you, but I
address
think
it. Sorry.
But the problem I'm seeing, and that comes back to what I was saying with the supply and demand issue, is that, yes, the business community needs to hire people for their business. And what you're saying is that youth are disenfranchised. They don't see the point of going to work because they can't buy a house. Meanwhile, the system that the business community, which is that Baker is promoting, are promoting a system that pushes youth out of buying home ownership. And I'm not making this up. This is the Bank of Canada,
Yeah.
supply and demand. We have too much demand and not enough supply. And I mean, look, I went to one of your rivals events the other day in Burnaby, and there was a couple uh, youth age 21, 24, and I asked them both if they were living on their own. Both said no. I said, do you expect to buy a home? No, not at all. So I mean, I think we need to kind of come to a crossroads between rhetoric versus reality. The rhetoric is the business community wants housing, or wants immigrants for their businesses, but at the same point in time, we are also pushing out the youth of our province out of this province because of these two opposing ideologies. One is we need these people, we need these immigrants to work our businesses, and the other is well, I don't want to work for these businesses because I can't build a future in this province. We need to make them both make sense. And I'd like to get your final thoughts on that before we move on.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you an example. The first home I bought when I moved to Rossland, British Columbia, is a 1,000 square foot home on a little lot. Paid $54,000. That's 2001. It sold 3 years ago, which would put us back to what, 2023. So in 22 years, so it's 22 years, which is a while, but it sold for $640,000. So
That's 1,000 square feet. Like if you
yeah,
bought so do you know what 1,000 square feet costs here in Vancouver? That's $1.2 million.
yeah, and so we've got a
Not even 1,000 square feet. I was talking to a
yeah,
bartender the other day and asked her what she was living in Vancouver, and she says she's living in a 400 square foot apartment in Vancouver. Not even an apartment, a studio, not even a bedroom. 400 square foot studio for $1,800 a month.
yeah, it's probably a deal. You know, I
Yeah,
mean, the other thing we have is uh, the is the specific to housing and rentals. The Airbnb market got sort of messed with from a tourism standpoint. That helped prop up the hotels because certain municipalities were allowing or disallowing, um, Airbnbs, and that sounds like that's sort of wealthy people that only have the Airbnbs. But what was happening in Kelowna, for instance, is young entrepreneurs that had one house were leveraging that house and their equity to buy another property so they could Airbnb it, make some money, and or rent it out long term. Stretched themselves out to make that work, worked hard to clean it themselves, manage it themselves, and then government, either at the municipal or provincial level, pulled the carpet out from underneath them and said you can't Airbnb it anymore. And there's a really strong tenancy act that really is really in favor of those renters and tenants, which I think is good. There should protections for tenants so landlords can take advantage of their tenants. But there's also cases where someone can move in and not pay their rent, and by the time they go through the process, you, as a landlord, you may not be able to collect rent for 10 months to a year while it gets sorted out in the tribunals. And so people are hesitant to get into those situations to rent to a long-term tenant if they can't kick them out for non-payment uh, or damage to the unit. So I think there's a real disconnect, and it plays into this housing. It plays into confidence in being able to live on your own as a young person, and then moving the goalposts, like my Kelowna example. Do I want to take that risk again, working two jobs and buying a second home, trying to build my wealth and get ahead if the government's going to change the rules, on a dime? So yeah, it's complicated, Dan.
no, I'm looking forward to seeing some solutions here, Warren, and I'm curious to see how this plays out because we're, like you said, we're at a crossroads.
Yeah.
We have one sector that wants another thing, but then when we look at like the youth, it's like you said, it's disenfranchising them because they can't see a future in this province. I'm glad you brought up permitting. Because I was looking at, not only are you a builder, but you've also had some history with
I
permitting.
have.
And I've looked at some of your past. In 2021, you applied for a permit to remove disease and hazardous trees on one of the property you owned. Council denied you, and at the same time, they passed a bylaw that was stricter for the tree removals. Walk me through what happened here, because I think this is a fantastic story.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's what's thrust me into the public arena. I sort of spent my life uh, not interested in social media or staying under the radar, if you will. I'm well known in my community, but in 2021, I applied to remove trees off 4 properties that I own in different companies, and I hired a professional forester to do evaluations on the properties. They determined there were diseased trees on one of the property. It was the larger one, significant. The other ones were lands that were meant for development. We're going to clean the trees off, do the geotechnical assessments, come up with a plan for housing, tiny homes on one of them, for instance, to make it more affordable. Going through the process, remove the trees, do the geotechnical, um, apply for rezoning, work your way through the process. Well, the council in Rossland decided that they weren't keen on me and they weren't keen on tree removal. Quotes like, when trees are cut down, they're gone forever. They said that some of the trees on my properties were old growth forests, which was just untrue, that the whole property burnt down 80 years ago. The bottom line was they had bylaws in place and rules in place that if um, a taxpayer or a builder like myself was to follow those rules, there's a reasonable expectation that if I follow a set of rules that are laid out, bylaws or building permit applications, or in this case, development permit applications, that you will be granted that permit at the end. But there was definitely nefarious activity in City Hall, and you frankly can go to YouTube and watch it because it was through COVID where they recorded themselves breaking the law, which was interesting. And without COVID, I wouldn't have got through this because it would have been a transcript that was a bit of back and forth, but it's right on the record on YouTube. And essentially, yeah, that's what they did. They conspired to slow me down when it was received at City Hall, then talk about, well, let's change the let's get legal advice, which they did, which was very clear that they had to issue the permits because I complied with the rules. But then they found they were looking for ways that they could skirt that and conspired and actually changed the tree retention bylaw such that if I won in court and challenged it, which I did, that when I came back to them, I wouldn't meet the new bylaw. So the judge threw the book at them, found them, this is being the city council, had acted in bad faith, and that leads to misfeasance in office to the individuals. And so with that first award, the judge ordered that the permits be issued forthwith. And then they didn't issue the permits for 8 months. They were actually in contempt of court and thumbed their nose at the Supreme Court level. So with that, I sued the 5 councillors personally, which was an action to hold them personally accountable for their actions. Much like someone drinking and driving, you have insurance, but if you get drunk and run someone over, you don't have insurance. And so I tackled them personally because they sort of thumbed their nose at the law, and that certainly got their attention when they were sued personally. And it ended up going to mediation in the fall of 2025. I can't talk about that because I had to sign a non-disclosure. Uh, was scheduled to go to court this month in March. But the bottom line was government thumbed their nose at the law. They got caught. I was able to beat them from the outside. And, the old saying is don't fight City Hall because it's very hard. And my case, the first case, replaced a case from 1954 called Ron Corelli versus Duplessis, which was the case that gets taught in law school specific to bad faith in government. And I reset the bar, and I did it from the outside with my own money. It ended up costing me in the end. Of course, I can't talk to the details of the mediation on the personal one, but it reset the bar to stand up for citizens that are bullied by government. And I did it on the outside, and I'm looking forward to being the next premier and being turned loose on the inside, looking for misfeasance from government, us, if I get in from our government, and to clean the mess up from the inside. I should be trusted to clean up our books and clean up how we operate as a government.
Respectfully, I respect that more, and that's kind of what I want to bring that up. You said you settled out of court. What did that teach you, about government accountability? Like when they settled with you, like what was your perspective from those 5 councillors? I know you can't tell me about the details about how it was settled, but obviously you can give me a perspective of like what that taught those councillors, because you can tell me how they like what their, their. Can you tell me about like what their demeanor and what that taught you based on those reactions on what government accountability is?
Well, the second one is against them personally, so it really wasn't about government. I guess, what I can share in general is councillors are covered under the Municipal Act and the Community Charter for um, acts that if it's a two-part standard. They're basically covered as councillors, and they're volunteers essentially in these small communities that run for a small stipend. And so there's very good coverage for them if they make a mistake, right? But in my case, and this goes to the first case, which I can discuss, which again made the second one personal work, was you had to prove two standards: that they knew what they were doing was illegal. Well, they had to do something illegal or incorrect. So the standard is correctness. That's what they use in the court, not reasonableness, but correctness. So what they did was illegal or incorrect, according to the judge, and they knew what they were doing was incorrect or illegal. So it's a two-part standard. If you're ignorant and you're on a council and you make a mistake, and you're covered for that. But municipal governments have been given too much power. They're under the province, and the province uh, can modify um, their they can modify the community charter and the local government act, and really has power over how municipalities act. But it hasn't really been managed that way in the past. So these municipalities can kind of run away, do what they like, slow the process down. They've grown. For instance, in Rossland, there was 3,500 people when I moved there in 1998, and there's about 4,600. And so, but the bureaucracy at City Hall has grown by 4 times when the populace has only grown by 33%. So it's just another example. They're good people working there, but it's become bloated in an upside down triangle at all levels of government, and we've got to find a way to flip the triangle over. We need the bureaucracy, need government employees to run our governments at all levels, but it's just become bloated, and we have to figure out a way to make it more efficient. And some of those solutions are going to come from the bureaucracies or the people that are working in government, as well as outsiders that come in from the outside. So there you go.
Like
Well,
disruptors like yourself.
you should be able to solve it. I mean, I went to them before this got out of hand, and they basically thumbed their nose at me, and then, of course, off it went to the courts. Um, I'm just grateful that those that come behind me will be able to lean on these precedents and hopefully make them think, when they're making decisions about people in their community that affect their business, that affect their employees, uh, and affect their residents, that they need to follow the rules.
Yeah, absolutely. Respectfully, I think that when you look at it, you have an abuse of power. Obviously, the Supreme Court of British Columbia said that they were abusing their power. And like you said, they thumbed their nose at you for 8 months beyond that, and then tried to put stricter
Yeah.
laws in. It looks like you're being hoodwinked the whole way through. And, and a lot of people are seeing this as, you stood up to the city, which is a hard, monumental thing to do. Why didn't you just walk away? And why didn't you just, kind of just, like whatever, take the L? And where do you think, and obviously you did that because you have the fortitude, the self-confidence to do that. But more than that, where did that trait come from?
I sat and I looked at the plus minus, the time that went into it. I mean, we produced almost 6,000 pages over both those cases in a period of 4 years. And I did a pile of the work, obviously had good legal counsel. But, there's a time to stand up. I watch others that got bullied by City Hall previous to me, and there was no consequence. This one, I kind of caught them red-handed because of YouTube and the fact that their council meetings were recorded and put online. Um, but it was a risk that we would go in and lose, which we didn't. And, it's funny. A lot of people, when I announced I was doing it, said they were behind me. And then I looked over my shoulder and everybody was gone. So, and the reason was not that they didn't want to be supportive, but that if I was unsuccessful or they're seen to be supporting me for the misfeasance that affects them and their businesses, whether they run a golf course, a ski resort, or a development company, they didn't want to be seen with me in case it backfired, because they know that they could be bullied at City Hall. However, when I won and turned around, there were lots of people sort of piling up on my shoulders to pat me on the back to say, thanks for doing that for all of us. We're glad you stood up. Um, and I guess that's what thrust me into, or put me on the stage to move forward and look at this province on a bigger scale, not just a municipal level. Is there's a lot going on. It's not all nefarious. I think a lot of it's just mismanagement. Um, David Evy's 6'6", but his head's in the clouds, and he's not looking down at the rest of us uh, with the idea that he should be working for all the people in British Columbia. I mean, I'm running for leader of the BC Conservative Party and the next premier, but what's super key to that is I'll be representing all British Columbians. So it's not just the Conservatives in this province, and there's dislike or disdain for the others. I'll be the leader of the province of British Columbia and all the residents that live here. So we have to sort of come with it from that perspective. And one of the things, I'll just tuck it in, is the property transfer tax between families. It goes to this housing, and it's a bit of a summary. Is we put this forward in the community, and we'll put it forward when we get into government, that if you're going to hand your property down through your family, so your parents are going to hand property down, you shouldn't be paying property transfer tax when it gets handed down. And especially as the second home, we've got parents that have built a couple of homes and want to hand it down to their kids. And um, government's got their hand in the pot at every level. And that property transfer tax was a temporary tax put in after Expo 86 to go into infrastructure. And it's just, government adds these little taxes everywhere. Uh, and there's no money left to take from the people that run businesses or employed in this province. So that's a little thing that we can give back, so that at least families can hand down their properties without having to go take out a mortgage to pay the tax man to own their parents' home. It's overreach, and that needs to change based on principle. That's need to change on principle.
I agree with that. I think anyone looking at the property transfer tax in terms of where the bar is, I think it's, and I could be wrong, I don't have the number in front of me, but I think it's $750,000 on a home. You have to pay a land transfer tax. That's basically
Yeah,
all of Metro Vancouver.
and
Now, and
there's if you're selling a property, fine. If it's commercial property, fine. I mean, the other thing I'd like to see is, if I buy a home today for, say, $500,000, I'm a first time home buyer, and I've got to pay property tax every year, but my assessment goes up. Say it goes up in 2 years, and it's now assessed at $1 million. Well, my property tax is going to double, and that might just kind of put me out of the market again. So what I'd like to see is, if it's your primary residence and you pay, for my example, $500,000, and then in 2 years it's worth $1 million, there should be a fixed amount, whether it's a maximum of 2% or 3%, figure out the number per year, that your property tax will go up. So you're sort of sheltered from the inflation and from the doubling in quotes value of your property and doubling of your property tax. Does that make sense? So we sort of 2 or 3% here, as long as it's your primary residence.
yeah, well, I kind of understand it a little bit, because in your house, your property tax goes up with
Assessment.
the um value of your home, but it also goes down when the value goes down. So it's very linear in that regard. I don't disagree with you. I'm just questioning how that would work in practice. Because then again, like, you're looking at the flip side. So like, you're paying a fixed income at a higher rate, then your property value goes down. What happens then? I don't disagree with you, but I think that there are some holes that
Yeah,
are
I mean,
worth considering.
it's funny, we're in this leadership race. We've got everybody saying the same 5 items that they're going to fix, which doesn't differentiate us, which is, most want to appeal SOGI. They got DRIPA. We've got affordability. We've got housing. We've got healthcare, and we've got crime. So here we are spamming everybody's inboxes. I'm not spamming them. I'm actually reaching out to people on the phone. Only 13,000 more people to phone in the next month. But anyways, rather than sending a spam email saying the same as my competitors, Those are items that we're all talking about, but then what other solutions can we put in place? I mean, some of this is for election time when we get ideas from members in our community, province, parties to figure out what changes we can make to bring to the public of what we're going to do when we get in office. But these are all complicated. And I think all of us candidates have to be careful that we don't put our hand up for soapbox items like I'm going to bring back $1 beer or I'm going to cut out the PST. I know $1 beer would
I
be
want
great,
that actually.
but but these are promises that we
It's
shouldn't be
$2 beer
making
now, Warren.
until we get in and have a look at the books and figure out how much money's coming in, where it's leaking out. Because the question's going to become, how do we pay for these things? And
Sure.
my answer will be, we'll find out where things are leaking out, where we've got redundancy and waste. And as we clean those up, that money will be available for to beef up our healthcare, or some of our social programs, look at this crime issue, getting emergency rooms open across the province in all these little communities. I mean, I had someone give me an example from, I think it was 2 weeks ago. They were in Fort Nelson and the emergency room was closed. So they drove to Fort St. John. The emergency room was closed. So they drove to Dawson Creek. The emergency room was closed. So they drove to Prince George. So, you know, I think it's 9 hours to go from Prince George to Fort Nelson. So when we get into government, the first things we have to do is we've got to be able to service emergency rooms when people walk in. And we're going to have to pay for that. We're going to have to get that in place because that's a basic necessity of people need. And then we're going to have to work back on all these issues. There's a lot of issues. And when you have 15 years of mismanagement, maybe longer, and the inability to deal with some of the hard programs uh, and the major issues, it's a lot of work. And you need someone with the bandwidth to do it.
Oh, absolutely. But let's talk timelines though, because everyone has, like you said, everyone's promising, $1 beer, and everyone's promising to repeal DRIPA, everyone's promising to repeal SOGI. And now you're talking about looking at the books. What is the timeline before you can give British Columbians getting into office, looking into the books, and start giving us a plan on what's going to happen with this province? Because
Correct.
obviously the budget is unsustainable. I think the budget was at, and I believe it was between
$13.3
12 and
billion
$15 billion
deficit for 1 year.
deficit.
Yeah.
Thank you. 13.3. Obviously, that's unsustainable. So what is the timeline to look at the books and start saying, hey, we're going to look at this program, we're going to look at this program? And what's the plan with that? Because obviously some programs need to stay in place, they're essential services.
Right. We
But
can't
what is the
stop
timeline?
all services while we do an audit. So we're going to have to do that in real time. But we have to figure out where we are. Again, I caution, when I watched the competitors, friendly competitors in this race for the leadership, promise these things we're going to do. But the first thing we have to do is audit and figure out where we are. Right. We can't fix things. We're going to have to, get emergency rooms open and basics and keep ourselves on life support where we figure out where the money's going. Because the bottom line is people have no more money to give for taxation. And we're driving investment out of the province so rapidly that we're not going to get extra taxation from big business if they're running away from us. So we have to figure out where the money's going. We have to open these dialogues with investors to say, look, we're not going to slow you down. We're going to get these permits through quickly, and then we have to follow up. But we have to figure out where we are. It's the equivalent, Dan, to saying you come and knock on my door, being a mechanic and a fixer and a builder, and say, hey, Warren, my car won't start. So I hand you a starter and I tell you to go change the starter. So you go out, you put the starter on, you come back, you say, my car won't start. So I hand you another starter and I send you out to put the starter on. I mean, that maybe it's out of fuel. So, we've got to figure out where we are first, right? And that's going to take, I mean, God, that's going to take a year. We're going to do it while we're running the government and sort of looking under all the rocks for the waste and loss that's there. But the bottom line, it's going to take probably 6 years to make a big enough movement. And I know people don't want to hear that. My competitors will say, I can fix it in a year, but it's bullshit. You can't fix it in a year. It's going to take 6 years to bring the water level down from here to here. And that's working 7 days a week with the smartest people in our province
Right.
and elsewhere. Um, and people have to believe that we're going to do the right thing. They'll start feeling some relief, but 6 years is more than one election cycle. And so you have to put a leader in that has the bandwidth for 10 years. And I think that's being forgotten in this leadership race. There's some people don't have the bandwidth for 10 years, or they've got young families, or, I don't want to sound ageist, but, they're going to be in their mid 80s by the time 10 years is up. Or they're people that when things get tough, they leave and go to the private sector. I mean, you need someone that's going to be focused on this for 10 years, create the continuity and trust with investment to bring investment back, and someone that fixes things for a living. When your car's broken, you don't take it to the accountant, you don't
Right.
take it to the lawyer, and you don't take it to the poli-sci major. You take it to the mechanic, you have him troubleshoot it, and you figure out how to fix it.
I respectfully, and I respect everything you're saying. And one thing I like about this is that you're giving it a little, and respectfully. But if we're going to give it, we're going to get it. And
None,
let's be clear,
none,
Warren. You have no political experience prior to this election, and you're running to lead a party
one.
that already has sitting MLAs. And if you
Yep,
look at the
yep.
Rustad tenure, he was dogged with infighting, letters from EDAs, who knows where they were inspired from. There was leaks to the press. How will you work with caucus that has far more legislative experience than you? And how will you plan to earn the respect of the most seasoned MLAs there and
Yeah,
get
there's some
everyone
MLAs
rowing
that
in the
have
same
been in
direction?
various parties before. Peter Millibar's been around in various parties. He has more liberal views than I do, but he's certainly more experienced. And frankly, he's the only MLA in the race. I mean, what's interesting is we started with 11 people, which included 5 MLAs, and 2 MLAs couldn't get enough nominations to even get their paperwork in. So, so experience counts for something. A lot of the MLAs that are in there are really good people, have come from the community, but for most of them, it's their first term. So it's right. They have another 16, 18 months more experience than I do in there. So they've got their feet in the pool. But I'm not that far behind them. And I guess the ones I've spoken with, I mean, they are looking for a strong leader. I've had some great dialogue with many of them. Um, and they don't want someone that's going to be wishy-washy. We understand and we speak about working with each other with respect. Respect was lost in that caucus because, there was all sorts of antics going on, and maybe that's part of the growing process, but we can't get meaningful dialogue and move to a point where we're getting to, yes, finding out ways that we can move forward and fix some of these major issues in the province if we can't respect each other in the same room. So really, it's up to me to guide that, but I can't demand respect. I think I just have to show, by being respectful and by listening to people, and then make sure that we've got the common goal, which is putting the people of this province first, and the province and the people that invest here. And we want businesses to be strong so we can attract the tourism, which brings in more dollars. It's really starts with respect in that room. You know, we've got you know the MLAs are all new, and the government is in place with the bureaucracy and staff get frustrated if they look to their leaders who can't seem to get along within their own group. I mean, they probably roll their eyes at their desk, a lot of these government employees, and so yeah. So, people say, well, you got to
No, I
cut
don't
the
disagree with
bureaucracy.
that.
I'm like, yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
I'm sure there's a ton of waste and double up, but it must be frustrating for government employees, many of which vote NDP to protect their jobs. But if you get a real leadership, whether it's a Conservative Party or another, and they believe in the process that we're going to fix British Columbia and they can be part of that solution for all British Columbians, then we have a hope of getting things back on track. I mean,
I think that's slightly naive, and the reason I think that is obviously people are selfish when it comes down to it. And when you look at like large groups of people, people tend to default to incompetence. And I say that with the utmost respect to our public servants, but at the same point in time, when you're working in a sector, and this is true for large corporations, this is especially true for government, is that when you're working within your own silo, you want to protect that silo. You want to protect your own fiefdom. So I think that you're going to be having a lot more pushback than what your perspective, even if they believe in it, they still want to keep their jobs. They still want to keep their fiefdom. They still want to have a paycheck at the end of the day, and it's going to be hard. I don't think it's going to be easy, and I think that when you look at the books and when you're going to have to push back and say, like, you know what, like this department, well, there's already two other departments that do this job, and we're going to have to cut one of those too. I'm sorry, we're going to cut you. You're going to hear a lot of pushback and a lot of whining, and a lot of people from the mainstream media are gonna call that out. And I think what I respect about what you're doing is you're also saying that you're going to have to look at the books and see what's going on. And hopefully you're going to be able to present a case to the media, to the public, that says, no, this needs to be done.
Can I
Um,
make one comment
but
on that? Just one
let's
back
move
on
on
that.
to
So
a
I
lot of the
appreciate the
hot
fact that it
items.
seems
Go,
naive,
go ahead.
but the government employees who are counting on a pension, uh, because they got a good government job and they've only got 15 years left or 2 years left. Look, the water line's there for them too. They they're not sitting there happy trying to protect their silo.
Sure.
They're just trying to survive like everybody else, whether they're in a union, out of a union, and they recognize there has to be change. I mean, I know this. I was out in the East Kootenays, one of the largest unions out there. Went and talked to one of the union reps or the main union rep, and I'm going to get support from them because they're underwater too. There's a housing crisis. So regardless of the belief or whether you're working for government, um, the lines have crossed and the water level's high, and something has to be done. So I think there'll be more buy-in than there has been 10 or 15 years ago, because the government's broken. If there's no money there, when you promise someone today that they're going to get a pension in 15 years, and then you have to take that away because there's no money to pay for it, they're going to be very disappointed. So I think people realize that risk and want to be part of the solution. I just think the mentality is going to change because we're all in the same boat. I hope so.
I hope so. I genuinely,
Yeah.
honestly, and Warren, I say this with the utmost respect. I hope so. I think that, again, the government, we've bloated government, and our outcomes from government are not any better than where they were before. So I honestly hope that you're able to do what you promise. I really do. Let's move on to some of the hotbed issues. I've gotten a little bit of flack from my. Oh, are you recording? You there? Yeah, you're not live right now. Uh-oh. Try to get Warren back here. Participant. Sorry, folks. We're trying to get Warren back here. 1 second. I kind of need that music right now, where there's like a screen that says, "Please stand by." There he comes. There you are. Perfect. No problem. Thanks for
Sorry,
getting
Dan.
back with us, Warren. I appreciate that. So as I was saying, we were talking about some of the hotbed issues that, obviously we're going to have to talk about some of the issues that are really, um, you know, on the tops of minds of a lot of British Columbians, and especially conservatives. Let's talk about, and I got a lot of flack about this from, my past interview, and they asked me why I didn't question, some of my past interviews about Soji, why I didn't ask about DRIPA, and the default answer I've gotten from both those, and this is from multiple MLAs, is that Soji was supposed to be symbolic, DRIPA was, or excuse me, DRIPA was supposed to be symbolic, Soji was supposed to be an anti-bullying tool. And my question to you is, you have two daughters and you have seen how Soji plays out in the schools. What are your thoughts on the Soji program as you see it today in 2026?
Yeah, my daughters are 29 and 31, so they weren't party to to managing that or seeing that in the school system when they went through. But I have friends that are, have young children, and a lot of people are homeschooling their kids just to run away from it because they will have no part of it. Quite a few people I know are homeschooling their kids, which is their option. I don't think it belongs in the schools, period. It needs to be repealed.
You think it needs to be repealed? Great.
Full stop.
Day one?
Full stop. Yeah, I mean, it gets in the pile. We got to get emergency rooms open, but we'll hand that off, and it's got to get repealed and get out of the schools. What needs to get into the schools is a smarter program, or frankly, we came up with a program called SMART, is the acronym, and it's social media, um, awareness, and responsibility training. SMART. Uh, Nothing to do with SOGI, but what it does is it would be from kindergarten to grade 8 or grade 9 to teach kids how to manage social media, cell phones, communication, peers, ties into your health, that it's important to get time away off your phone. If you walk downtown Vancouver, everybody's on their phone, head down, bumping each other on the sidewalk. So, there is a problem. And for kids, I think it's a problem because they're sponges in school, and we need to focus on reading, writing, arithmetic, phys ed, all the basics, as well as some modern technology. They'll get taught about AI at some point in their school system. But this SMART program focuses on social media awareness and responsibility training and should be worked into the schools. Parents should have the ability to opt out of it if they don't like it, because it's not the basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. But you know, uh, SOGI, that doesn't belong there. We are not going to get between parents and their kids. That's not the role of the
Respectfully, I
school
respect
system.
that, right, Warren. Let me ask you a question about the past leadership. John Rustad, he was a strong voice pushing back against certain ideologies in education. What are your thoughts on Rustad's leadership and the direction he tried to take the party?
Well, I've met him a couple of times, and he admits that he made a lot of mistakes. I mean, he was humble. He shared them. Um, he has a passion for British Columbia. So personally, I liked John, um, but I think the mistakes he made were numerous enough that he lost the trust of people around him in the party. There was a vote that went on to for his support of his leadership that rubbed some people the wrong way, that wasn't put out across all party members. So a lot of mistakes were made. Some of it can be attributed to a party growing really fast, but I think John's time as a leader is up, and certainly that was why he was right or wrong moved out of his position. I mean, I don't like the fact that they used a term from the Constitution that was professional incapacitation. Incapacitation. And I've read it. It should be if he was in a coma that he would step down, but he obviously couldn't gain the respect of enough people in his caucus for whatever reason. And, rather than being thrown, he jumped. But he's still in the party, and he still has support in his own community. So, but I don't see him coming
No, no,
back
no,
as
and
a
that's not the
leader
question. The question was, is
anytime.
like, what did you think of his leadership and in the direction he tried to take the party? At the end of the day, like, you have to respect what the man did. Two MLAs, two official opposition.
Well,
I think he was shy of 200 votes of leading government. A lot of respect is owed
yeah.
to the past leader. So I think that when we look, obviously he
Well,
made
I
mistakes, and there's no doubt
definitely.
about that. I just want to kind of get your feeling from that, and I think you did say that. You said he, respectfully, he did a lot of good things.
Yeah, I mean, he got it up from nothing. It wasn't just him,
Yeah.
it was others. But yeah, I think a chunk of that too is it sort of vacuumed up all the politicians that had had enough, or people with experience, and a lot that from their communities, maybe without experience, but had the faith that they wanted change, and it wasn't going to work with the NDP. So it grew very quickly, and managing the party, managing the caucus, and then managing his opposition is a lot for one person. So, being a strong leader, you want to get the strongest people around you so you can manage all these situations. And I'm not sure he got enough strong people around him to alleviate the stress that he felt. And with stress, he probably made some decisions that he wish he would have, gone in another
Respectfully, no,
direction.
that's
So,
I can absolutely agree with you. I think that probably the party got too big too fast, and there was a lot of growing pains, and unfortunately, that's just, it was either gonna work or it wasn't, and I think we saw this
right.
leadership race is a good answer for everyone listening at home, like what the end results were. Let me ask you a question, a little bit more about Soji and, some of your candidates that you're running with. One of your rivals has a notable past on the Soji file. The BC Liberal Party, and I'm glad that you brought up the BC Conservatives because a lot of people see the BC Conservatives as an indictment of the past parties that were the opposition party, i.e., the BC United, i.e., the BC Liberal Party under Andrew Wilkinson, and the BC United Party under Kevin Falcon. And a lot of people see that the BC Conservative Party is an indictment of those two parties. One of your rivals, Caroline Elliott, had a notable past on Soji. Back when she was active with the BC Liberals, the party introduced Soji 123. It introduced it. And when we go back to that file, a former Chilliwack-Kent MLA, Lori Thronis, was one of the few BC Liberal caucus who publicly stood up against Soji in schools and also criticized aspects of the federal conversion therapy ban, Bill C-4. And his comments weren't very controversial, in my opinion. I think that when he commented about it, he said, maybe we should introduce voluntary care for people that want to transition and permanently harm their bodies. Caroline Elliott was commented on that and said, in a public interview, said that those views were abhorrent. What do you think was abhorrent about those views Lori had?
Well, look, it's interesting that um, we get into these complicated, like Soji, UNDRIP, these um, these policies and this need to quotes better society and be more open and honest and inclusive and I think it comes down to you want to treat people the way you want to be treated. But things have got out of hand. We've got, Carolyn Elliott is very well educated. She's young. She did a dissertation, I believe, in 2009, which is about 16 years ago, and she's very intelligent. And I don't know if she has two PhDs. I think she has one, maybe, but maybe she has two. But I just when I see the advertising out there now that says, you know, and she's saying Soji's got to go, or at least that's what we're seeing in the media, and Millibar's, considering it, these politicians and these academics, but I'm getting advertising, into my box and support Carolyn Elliott because she's got the education to repeal DRIPA and Soji, and I'm like, well, it was the education that got us into the mess, and frankly, you can take the aircraft mechanic or home builder in a pen and you can get rid of Soji and you can get rid of UNDRIP. So I just find it really offensive that the liberals that are inside the Conservative Party, that were inside the Liberal or United Party elsewhere, that were for and helped develop these programs that now they're saying have to be removed. I find it hypocritical, and I just hope the public reads through it. I mean, I guess I'm not a politician. I'm a builder, not a bureaucrat. I know we're running that across the line to get people's attention, but it matters. People that just want to be in government to be in government, or want to run this snake path of Soji on, Soji off. I mean, hopefully people see through it. You can't get between the kids and the parents. Number one, uh, until you're 18 years of old, you're not an adult. And so I don't want teachers telling kids what they can do behind the backs of parents. I understand the anti-bullying component. I'm all for that, but I think there's a different way to do that with the smarter social media training, and other vehicles. I don't know why it always comes down to sexual orientation and all. Like you're until you're 18, you're under the care and control of your parents, or you should be. And after 18, if you want to make changes to your body and do things because you're not comfortable in who you are, at least you'll be an adult to make those decisions. Doing it at 6, 8, 10 years old and carving young mindsets on subjects that are really adult subjects. It's just not right.
I would even go farther and argue that 21 would probably be a more appropriate age for that type of
Yeah, I
but
mean,
I mean,
minimum
and I'm
18,
I'm
but
splitting hairs, and quite frankly,
yeah.
I'm speaking from someone from experience, someone that's I was just a child at 18, 21 I was still a child. I think it wasn't until I was 32 that I actually felt comfortable in my own skin, and I can't imagine the the pressures these kids have on today, and they're just trying to make sense of their bodies, and we're telling them, hey, like maybe it's because you're not the right sex, and it's like what? I have a friend at home, or I have a friend with a kid, and he didn't know what the word anxiety meant, and his one of his aunts came in, and she's like, well, maybe he has anxiety. Kid anxiety for fucking two, or sorry, I don't mean to swear, but had anxiety for 2 weeks. But he didn't know what it was
Yeah.
before that. Like he just kept saying, I have anxiety. So I think kids are impressionable. I want to move on to DRIPA. And, a lot of people were pushing DRIPA before the Cowichan file came in, especially BC Liberals, BC United. And a lot of, the past MLAs, they don't have a great record on that. John Rustad included. He said that, DRIPA was supposed to be symbolic. But now we've seen what the end result of DRIPA is. And I've heard a lot of people saying that, we need to consult with the First Nations, especially when it comes to projects permitting. Let me ask you a question. In your opinion, what is the appropriate timeline for consultation? Like, what do you think that would be in terms of projects? Because if we look at towards Sweden, Sweden can issue a permit within 2 to 3 years. Very
Right.
liberal country. Here in British Columbia, it's 10 to 15 years to issue a permit for a mine. Think about that.
Yeah.
British Columbia, 15 years. Liberal Sweden, or leftist Sweden, 2 to 3 years. So obviously
Yeah.
the permitting is an issue. Obviously we have to consult with the First Nation. Nobody's denying that we need to consult with the First Nations. What is a timeline that you would see in terms of consultation and permitting? And then let's be clear, they're both different things.
Yeah. Well, consultation has to happen for sure with various groups, whether there's environmental concerns or otherwise, but there has to be um, a timeline that's reasonable that has a start. We start talking about it, and we're going to make a decision whether it goes forward at X time in the future, and we need to shrink that up. It can't be a perpetual look. First Nations got to say we like this project or we don't, and if we don't, what are the reasons? And then we try and resolve those. Same with environment. Some projects won't go ahead because of various concerns, but it can't be the perpetual holdover by a small group, because it is based on populace, uh, that slows projects down and drives investment away from the province. If they want to help um, grow the province and be part of uh, the help our province thrive, which is going to help pay when everybody's thriving and there's tax money coming in and waste is less. There's more for social programs, healthcare, education, all these things. But there's no benefit to First Nations to slow down or stop a project. And it feels from investors that I talk to like, they'll approve it if they're written a big check to keep the thing moving. And that, there's some words to describe what that sounds like that I'm not supposed to use on TV, but partnerships have to be partnerships. They can't use coercion or, we'll think about it and, just dragging on the process until, they get a larger stake or a larger payout to move a project forward. If they're going to participate, they have to participate in good faith with all the other proponents to help move a project forward. And if the project doesn't make sense, if half of the proponents don't like the idea of a project or it needs to be modified, then we need to find a vehicle to make a change, whether it's in a different location or a different project. But timelines have to be shrunk up and fixed so that there's the reasonable expectation that something will get done in X period of time, period.
Warren, thank you for coming on. Yeah, I'll give you the final word. But you made this case of the province. It needs builders, not bureaucrats. You've taken on City Hall.
Right.
You've worked in the private sector your entire life, and you're asking voters to trust you with something bigger. So here it is, to directly to the members watching, why you, why now, and why should conservatives believe you're the one who can not only lead this party, but actually defeat David Eby and govern British Columbia? Last word.
Well, I'm a leader and I recognize, and one of my greatest strengths is I know what I don't know. And my worry with the other candidates is they're telling you what they know and how they're going to fix all these things, and it's frankly a bunch of bunk. The liberals that are inside our party are good people, but like my wife said at the beginning of this, who doesn't follow politics at all, is you seem to have a lot of liberals in the party. Why don't they go start their own party, and then you could have the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party? And it's a really good point. I mean, she doesn't follow politics, but it's, you know, putting on a blue shirt when you've come from the Liberal and the United side and you've supported Soji and UNDRIP,
Drippa.
and you've helped carve it with being a bureaucrat or someone with a PhD, and now you want to undo it. I mean, that's not leadership. That's just following a path to get into power. I'm going to actually build and fix things. You're going to have me on the phone 7 days a week for 10 years as my commitment, until I'm either jump or thrown from the bus, but I'll commit to 10 years. And you're going to get what you see here. The nonsense has got to stop. We've got to focus on the critical items first. We got to figure out where we are by doing an audit, and then come up with a plan, not just within caucus, but the best people that live in this province that are experts in their field to help us right this ship. It's not going to be David Eby we're fighting. I suspect that they'll do what I call the Trudeau Carney shuffle, where David will shuffle out and they'll put someone else in that's more populist. So this is not a gimme. I think some of my competitors think that they're just going to be handed government. That's a mistake. And regardless, the people that are going to vote for me in an actual election, if I'm chosen as leadership, they're going to be people from the Green Party, people from the NDP, who would normally vote NDP because those people are hurting as well. Some of the union people, they're going to vote for me because they see me as a practical solution, a guy that's been in manholes, he's been on the roof of a house, he's been on the side of a helicopter, he knows how to build things, he knows how to fix things, and people are tired of the bullshit.
Warren, I appreciate you coming on. You're not a career politician, you're a builder. You run a business, you've worked in aviation and the resource sector. You've taken on City Hall and won. And now you're asking voters to trust you to take on that same energy to Victoria. That's a very different pitch than the establishment lane in this race. To everyone watching, this is part of our BC Conservative Leadership interview series. We're sitting down with every serious candidate and asking them the very same hard questions. If you care about affordability, public safety, red tape, and the future of our resource economy, pay attention. Warren Hamm, thank you for the conversation. Thank you.
The
We'll see you
people
next
get
time.
to decide, not me. I put my name out. They need to get out and vote regardless, but the decision you make is going to affect the generations to come. This is a critical point in history. Don't be lazy. Get out there and vote.
Respectfully, Warren, thank you again.
Thank you, Dan.
If you're still here, good. It means you're paying attention. It means you're not asleep. You're not gaslit. You haven't been bought by the media spin or the liberal fairy tale that everything is fine while the country burns. I'm Dan Knight, and this is the opposition. They have the consultants, they have the lobbyists, they have the legacy press, CBC, CTV, Global, spoon-feeding you government-approved talking points like it's North Korea, but with a better wardrobe. But we have each other. We've got the truth, we've got the grit, and we have the absolute audacity to stand up and say, no more. No more fake budgets, no more climate virtue signaling while our economy crumbles. No more surrendering your sovereignty to Brussels, Beijing, or Beltway elites. You can find me on Substack or Twitter, Dan Knight MMA, or on Instagram, and wherever honest Canadians are still allowed to speak freely. If you like what you heard, like it, share it, send it to someone who still thinks for themselves. We are building something here, not just commentary, but a coalition, a resistance to the rot, a community that refuses to bow, bend, or beg for permission. They have the legacy media, but we have you. And if we stick together, they don't stand a chance. Let's make it count. I'll see you on the next episode of The Opposition.